The screaming metal of Flight 447 cutting through the afternoon sky should have been Marcus Chen's biggest worry that Tuesday. Instead, he was calculating whether the $3.47 left in his checking account would cover his daughter's school lunch for the rest of the week. His weathered hands gripped the armrest of seat 17C, knuckles white not from turbulence, but from the constant anxiety of a man who'd been drowning in slow motion for 3 years. The divorce papers had arrived the same day Lily lost her first tooth. Sarah had taken everything: the house, the car, most of their savings, leaving Marcus with joint custody, a mountain of legal debt, and a 7-year-old who still asked why mommy didn't live with them anymore. He'd moved them into a studio apartment above Mrs. Rodriguez's bodega, where the walls were thin enough that Lily could hear every argument from the couple next door. But she never complained. She never asked for the toys her friends had or the birthday parties they couldn't afford. She just hugged him tighter each night and whispered, "It's okay, Daddy. We have each other." Now, 30,000 feet above Ohio, Marcus stared at the boarding pass that had cost him his last emergency credit card payment. His sister Emma's wedding in Denver couldn't wait, and despite every financial advisor's voice screaming in his head, he'd bought the ticket. Lily was with Sarah for the weekend, one of the few silver linings of their custody arrangement. At least his daughter wouldn't see him cry when the credit card bills arrived next month. The businessman in 17A hadn't stopped talking since takeoff, phone pressed to his ear, voice booming about quarterly projections and market positioning, completely oblivious to the fact that his small decisions probably affected more lives than Marcus would ever touch. The man's Rolex caught the cabin light as he gestured, and Marcus couldn't help but notice it probably cost more than his yearly rent. "Sir, you'll need to end your call and prepare for landing," the flight attendant said, her smile professional but strained. "Do you know who I am?" the businessman snapped, not bothering to look up from his phone. "I'm Richard Hawthorne, CEO of Hawthorne Industries. This call is worth more than your salary." Marcus winced. He'd seen that look before, the same expression on the landlord's face when he'd been 3 days late with rent, the same dismissive glance from the loan officer who'd rejected his small business application. But the flight attendant, a woman maybe in her 50s with kind eyes and a name tag reading Jana, just maintained her smile. "I understand, Mr. Hawthorne, but federal regulations require federal regulations can wait 5 minutes. Hawthorne waved her off like she was a mosquito. Marcus watched Janet's shoulders sag slightly, and something twisted in his chest. He'd been that invisible person countless times, dismissed and disregarded by people who had never wondered if their grocery money would stretch to cover dinner. Without thinking, he leaned forward. "Hey." His voice was quiet but firm. "She's just doing her job." Hawthorne finally looked up, his eyes cold and calculating. "Excuse me." The flight attendant. "She's just trying to keep everyone safe. Maybe show a little respect." The tension in the cabin was palpable. A few passengers turned to watch, but most pretended to be absorbed in their phones or magazines. Marcus felt his face flush, realizing he just confronted a man who probably made more in a day than Marcus did in a year. Hawthorne's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Respect from someone flying coach? Let me guess, construction worker, mechanic? You wouldn't understand the pressure of running a billion-dollar company." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, but not because they were cruel. They hit because they were partially true. He was a mechanic, or had been before the shop closed down. He was flying coach because first class was a fantasy. But being broke didn't make him less human. "You're right," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I wouldn't understand that pressure, just like you probably don't understand the pressure of choosing between your child's medicine and the electric bill. But that doesn't give either of us the right to treat people badly." For a moment, something flickered across Hawthorne's face: surprise, maybe even shame. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the familiar mask of indifference. "Whatever," he muttered, ending his call. Jana caught Marcus's eye and mouthed thank you before continuing down the aisle. Marcus slumped back in his seat, adrenaline leaving him shaky. He'd probably just made an enemy of a powerful man, but some things were worth fighting for. Dignity, respect, the basic human decency his daughter deserved to see in the world. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, we're beginning our descent into Denver. Flight attendants, please prepare for landing." That's when everything went wrong. The first sign was the sudden, violent lurch to the left. Marcus's stomach dropped as the plane seemed to fall from under him. Oxygen masks tumbled from the ceiling like yellow flowers blooming in hell. The screaming started immediately, not just from passengers, but from the aircraft itself. Metal groaning under stresses it was never meant to bear. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties," the captain's voice, tight with controlled panic. "Please remain calm and follow the instructions of your flight attendants." But calm was impossible when the plane was dropping like a stone, when coffee cups became projectiles, when the woman across the aisle was praying in Spanish while clutching a photo of her grandchildren. Marcus fumbled for his oxygen mask, his training from countless safety videos utterly useless in the face of actual terror. The plane leveled out for a moment, and in that brief respite, Marcus saw Hawthorne in the seat beside him. The CEO's face was gray, his hands shaking as he tried to work his phone. For the first time, he looked like what he was, a scared human being. "No signal," Hawthorne whispered, more to himself than to Marcus. "I can't. I need to call my daughter. She's only 12. If something happens to me." Marcus watched this powerful man crumble, and every bitter thought he'd harbored melted away. They weren't CEO and mechanic anymore. They were just two fathers, terrified they might never see their children again. "What's her name?" Marcus asked. "Sophie." Hawthorne's voice cracked. "She's at boarding school in Connecticut. Straight A's. Plays violin. Wants to be a marine biologist. I missed her recital last month because of a merger. I thought there would be more time." The plane shuddered again, and Marcus reached across the armrest, placing his hand on Hawthorne's shoulder. "Tell me about her for the next 10 minutes. As the aircraft fought its way toward an emergency landing, Hawthorne told Marcus everything. How Sophie had his wife's eyes but his stubborn streak. How she'd cried when they'd sent her to boarding school but pretended she was fine. How she collected shells from every beach they'd visited, keeping them in a jar by her bed. How he'd been so focused on building an empire that he'd forgotten to build a relationship with his daughter. "I've got a little girl too," Marcus said, when Hawthorne's voice failed him. "Lily, she's 7. Lost her first tooth last week and put it under her pillow. But I couldn't afford to be the tooth fairy that night. Had to borrow $1 from my neighbor." Hawthorne looked at him with something like wonder. "You still played tooth fairy, of course. That's what dads do." The plane lurched again, more violently this time. Through the window, Marcus could see fire trucks lining the runway, their lights flashing like earthbound stars. The captain's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Prepare for emergency landing. Brace positions." Everyone in that moment, facing the very real possibility of death. Marcus thought about Lily, about how she'd curl up in his lap every night to read books they'd borrowed from the library, about her laugh when he did funny voices for the characters, about how she'd told him just last week that he was her hero, not because he had superpowers, but because he never gave up. He thought about how she'd grow up if he didn't make it home. Would Sarah tell her that her daddy loved her more than all the stars in the sky? Would she remember the songs he sang to her when she had nightmares? The plane hit the runway hard, bounced, hit again. The sound of grinding metal filled the cabin as the aircraft skidded sideways. Emergency brake screaming. Marcus felt the world spin, his body pressed against the seat belt. And then, silence. Smoke began to fill the cabin. Emergency lighting cast everything in an hellish red glow. People were crying, some injured. But they were down. They were alive. Everyone remained calm. Jeanette's voice, somehow steady despite the chaos. "We need to evacuate immediately. Leave your belongings and move to the nearest exit." Marcus unbuckled his seat belt, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the simple mechanism. Beside him, Hawthorne was struggling with his own belt, his face pale and disoriented. "I can't. My hands won't work," Hawthorne whispered. Marcus reached over and helped him, then grabbed the older man's arm. "Come on, we're getting out of here." They joined the stream of passengers moving toward the emergency exits. The woman from across the aisle was limping, blood running down her forehead. An elderly man had fallen and couldn't get up. Without hesitation, Marcus helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they moved toward the exit. The slide was steep and terrifying, but they made it down. Fire trucks and ambulances surrounded the aircraft, their sirens wailing. EMTs rushed toward them, with stretchers and